So Regavim is an Israeli movement, really. It's a nonprofit watchdog organization, which is a little bit different than many of the organizations that you're familiar with, because we take issues through the entire spectrum of extra parliamentary affairs. Regavim was founded 16 years ago by three young men. Some of them are more famous than others at this point. But each of them came to the same realization at more or less the same time, but from a different perspective. And that realization was that protection of land resources, the question of who uses the most basic resource any nation has, and that is the land itself, is really the most basic expression of the nation's sovereignty. So who's using the land in the land of Israel? For what purposes, by what permission, and what does that mean? What are the ramifications for the future of the country? And that is what we are dedicated to. We are actually dedicated to returning the Zionist vision of land use policy to Israel's public sphere and to the public discourse in general in Israel and abroad. So all of what we do starts with the land and works its way up all the way through the highest realms of international law. And those things come together in a variety of ways. I'm going to switch. Yes. So how do we do what we do? This is a statement of really what we do. What we do, the way we do it is we divide the country into regions. We have field coordinators who go out into the field and see what's actually happening on the ground. They document and then research everything that's happening on the ground throughout the land of Israel. That means in the Galilee, it means in the Negev, and it means in Judea and Samaria. Everywhere that the state of Israel has jurisdiction of one kind or another is our purview. But the issues in each of these areas are very, very different. We use different tools to collect the information. So we do a lot of legwork, a lot of photography. We use drones to take aerial photos, and we also purchase aerial photos of the entire country and analyze the changes on the ground and look for patterns that will explain to us what the outcomes are of land use policy or the lack of that policy. So we're going to now, let me go back again before we switch to the next slide. So the topic that I was given to discuss this evening includes the Jewish history of Judea and Samaria, and how that impacts the discourse, what the legal aspects of Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria are. And I'm going to do something that I don't generally do, which is go back to ancient times. And I'll explain why I'm going that far back momentarily. But what you see before you is a map of the land of Israel, actually the Jewish Commonwealth during the time of the 12 tribes. You'll notice what the map looks like, where Israel was and where it was not. You'll see that Israel was located in what we today call the land of Israel. It includes Judea and Samaria, and part of what is today known as Jordan, the Transjordan area that was populated by 2.5 tribes. Now, many people will say ancient history, mythology, even biblical things, they don't stand up in court. This is not a document that we would bring to court. However, this document took on enormous legal ramifications and enormous weight as we go through history. And I'm going to jump now 1700 years into the future from that map. And we're going to begin to look at the modern legal constructs that define what should be happening, or what the international framework for Israel's rights in Judea and Samaria should be. So what you're looking at here is the sum total of the Balfour Declaration. And this was the first statement that really crystallized the aspirations of the Zionist movement, first expressed in the modern era by Theodor Herzl, not many years before the Balfour Declaration was published. But the Balfour Declaration eventually set the stage for legal recognition of the Jewish people's historical connection and essentially their unqualified claims to the land of Israel. Now, the interesting thing was that the Balfour Declaration was not a legal document. At the time that it was issued, the British Empire did not have title to the land of Israel. That changed after the First World War and the dismemberment, really, of the Ottoman Empire. But we're going to look now, what you're looking at now is a fascinating document, and that this explains why I brought that biblical map. This is one of the first legally recognized maps of Palestine. This was the map upon which the Balfour Declaration and the treaties that followed the Balfour Declaration and subsumed the Balfour Declaration were based. And this map was created by George Adam Smith, His Majesty's cartographer, J.G. Bartholomew. This was the map that was recognized as Palestine for the purposes of creating the mandate, the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. This was the area that was set aside by the major powers, the 8 core members of the decision-making body, essentially, and later adopted and ratified by the entire international community. This was Palestine. You'll note that the borders of Palestine that were all of this area that you see before you here in pink, all of it set aside for the reconstitution, not creation, but reconstitution of a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland in Palestine, on both sides of the Jordan River. This entire area was set aside for Jewish settlement, Jewish self-rule, Jewish sovereignty. So what happened? If this is what the countries of the world recognized, and this was the map upon which the Balfour Declaration rested, it didn't last long. Again, this is the map of the entire mandate over which the British Empire was asked to administer until such time as a Jewish homeland could be established. Note again, what we now know as the land of Israel, as the state of Israel, Judea and Samaria, all of Transjordan, all of this area here, going all the way up to the Saudi Arabia, all the way up to Saudi Arabia. We know, all of us, I believe, that these are not the boundaries of the modern state of Israel. This is the map, a much smaller section of Transjordan that the Jewish representatives to the Conference of San Remo presented. This was what the Jewish community asked for in order to constitute their national home. You'll notice, again, both sides of the Jordan, but nowhere near as much territory as had been set aside by the mandate. What had happened was this dotted line that you see here is the Hijaz Railway. The Jewish community, the leadership of the Jewish community that was seeking to create a Jewish state asked for more or less the biblical boundaries of the Jewish Commonwealth, that very first map that we saw, where the tribes lived and nothing beyond. But for reasons of its own, the British enlarged that area considerably. They did so not because they wanted to give the Jews more, but because they wanted to give the French less. You'll notice that up here is an area that was a French mandate, and on this side as well. And the British were more in a conflict with the other European powers for territory and control and resources, etc. They were much more interested in keeping things out of French hands than they were in giving them into Jewish hands. But that was, we once again became embroiled in geopolitical concerns and considerations that were beyond us. But the map of Palestine as it was in 1917, at the end of the First World War, this was presented and approved by at the San Remo conference. And at the San Remo conference, this actually was a legal document, because at the San Remo conference, title was given to the powers, the victorious powers after the First World War, and all the territories that had been under Turkish rule, under the Ottoman Empire, were allotted to the victorious powers and were placed as sacred trusts until such time as independent states could be formed. This was the map that was approved for the independent Jewish state. And we know that things changed, and they changed very, very rapidly, because only 2 years later, and we can look at this map a little bit more closely, almost 80% of the territory was disconnected from the entire Palestine mandate and was given to the Hashemites who had sided with Britain during the First World War and had aided the British in defeating the Turkish Empire. So this was the reward. And this was actually something that the British had planned in advance, even though the maps did not reflect this. This was the upshot of the British decision. Some will call it illegal. Mandatory power has no authority to change the boundaries of the mandate. Even the council that sat at San Remo did not have that authority, but it was done and has never been undone. So this again, these are the borders that became the Jewish state. And you'll notice that it's everything to the west of the Jordan River. Everything to the east of the Jordan River was given to Arabs of one stripe or another. Yes, altogether there were 13 mandates created out of the territories that had been the Ottoman Empire, and all of them became independent states. So Syria and Lebanon, Mesopotamia, which became Iraq, and all of these other areas became independent states at the same time, all except Israel. The British, in a series of extremely problematic moves, again and again, let's say violated, there's no other word, they violated the terms of the mandate. The mandate had required specifically that Jewish immigration be encouraged and Jewish close settlement over the entire territory be encouraged, and no territory was allowed to be ceded to any foreign power. All of these things were violated in short order by the British, to the point that the British, for reasons of their own, decided not only to create two states out of what was one state, again, this being the first two-state solution, the creation of Jordan, with a very, very uneven division of the territory. But at a certain point, they brought another suggestion to redivide the remaining sliver that remained of the original mandatory territory. So out of the 23% of the territory that was left, they proposed redividing that once again. Now, remember, the year is 1947. The Jewish people have been decimated in Europe. The Holocaust is a very, very recent, extremely painful memory, and the Jewish people were offered a choice. The leadership in the land of Israel were offered a choice. You can either take a percentage of that percentage that's left, or take nothing. So the Jewish leadership agreed to the 1947 partition plan, but the Arabs rejected it out of hand. So look again at this map. Note where the borders of Israel were meant to be. The partition plan, which was never ratified, never accepted, and never received any further legal consideration. And then we move ahead. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, the Jordanians, who had already been given nearly 80% of the territory, joined the other invading Arab forces and crossed the Jordan, crossed the international border, and occupied and eventually annexed this territory. They changed the name. They created a new name for this territory in order to justify their presence to the west of the Jordan, and they began to call it the West Bank. Until that time, the only name that it had ever had, these two sections of territory, were Judea and Samaria. Judea here, Samaria here. And parts of Jerusalem fell within that. Now, look carefully at this map and you will see, I'm not sure how clearly you can see it on your monitor, but the area that delineated by this illegal encroachment and eventual annexation was marked in green on the maps. This is the famous green line. And this area, called the West Bank by some, still called Judea and Samaria by those who, like the rest of the nations of the world in 1948, did not recognize the Jordanian conquest in an act of aggression and illegally occupied and annexed this territory. So we continue to call this area Judea and Samaria as it had always been called. The map remained the same from 1948 until 1967. I remind you, for those of you like me who are not very good at math, that is 19 years. So the Jordanians occupied this area for a grand total of 19 years. Their occupation and annexation was never recognized. It was actually universally condemned, including by members of the Arab League. Only 2 countries in the world recognized the Jordanian annexation of what they called the West Bank. One of them was Great Britain, because Great Britain had all of these other geopolitical interests still in common with Jordan. That was why Jordan was created to begin with. And the other was Pakistan. Significant or not, I don't want to answer that, but all other countries condemned the Jordanian presence to the west of the Jordan River and never recognized any sovereignty of any kind by Jordan in that area. And that's significant as we move forward and we try to analyze the legal structure that exists or should exist in these territories. So the map remained the same for 19 years. Moving forward, well, in 1967, Israel returned to these areas in a war of self-defense, was once again attacked by Jordan that violated the armistice line that had created the Green Line to begin with in 1949 actually, and once again joined invading Arab armies, but this time they lost, and Israel retook the territory that had always been part of the internationally recognized borders of Israel. Then Israel made a fateful decision. In 1967, in the aftermath of the stunning success, the stunning victory in the Six-Day War, the State of Israel said, okay, we will hold the situation in abeyance until such time as we can negotiate a mutually acceptable political disposition for the people living in this area. Said nothing about territory. It said everything about individual rights, civil rights, and political rights, but not national rights. This was a fateful decision, and it was a decision that Israel took unilaterally. There is no precedent for a decision of this kind anywhere else in the world. There has not been another case of a victorious army taking territory in a war of self-defense that has not immediately, especially in the case where it was returning to itself territory that had been illegally seized by the aggressors. There's never been a case where the repatriation did not involve immediate extension of the victor's law and to this territory. We cannot call this annexation. It's not that Israel didn't annex these territories when it won the war in 1967. It could not annex this territory because this territory, A, had no sovereign, no recognized sovereign internationally, and B, was always intended to be part of its own borders. Therefore, it was impossible to annex. All it had to do was to declare that it had repatriated this territory and was applying Israeli law once again, as was originally intended. But Israel did not do that. And it waited patiently for a partner for peace in order to discuss the political outcome of the war and the determination of the political status of the people living in the territory. And as I said, this was a fateful decision. But we're going to continue looking at the map because the map, although it has remained like this, has had some subtle changes that are fateful thereafter. So from 1967 until 1995, more or less, the map remained the same. This is a map that was created when the Oslo Accords were signed. Oslo Accords and 2.5 years later, the Wye River Plantation Accords that supplemented them. So we had Oslo I, Oslo II, and the Wye River Accords. They're all reflected in the map that you're looking at right now. What you see here is the division of the contested territory, all of what's within that green line. We maintain that green line. And all the territory was divided into 3 distinct regions. The Oslo Accords, by signing the Oslo Accords, the state of Israel created the Palestinian Authority in order to establish an official body to represent the Palestinian Arabs living in these territories and to give them a measure of self-rule. Nowhere in the Oslo Accords does it say anything about statehood. Nowhere in the Oslo Accords does it require the state of Israel to accept the existence of another state west of the Jordan River. What the Oslo Accords did was say, we would like to create a possibility for peaceful coexistence with a Palestinian Arab entity of some sort, whose political nature will be determined through negotiation, and its boundaries will be determined through negotiation. Israel immediately ceded authority over the major Arab population centers in Judea and Samaria. That means that the bright red sections that you see here, these are the major urban population centers where Arabs were living in the large cities that you've probably heard of in Judea and Samaria. Nablus, Shechem, Bethlehem, Jericho. These are the large urban areas. That was called Area A. Area B, the darker colors, were the rural Arab population centers in Judea and Samaria, large villages, but not cities. Area B was created as islands or bubbles within the larger area that you see here in yellow. That is Area C. Area C was placed under full Israeli jurisdiction for all matters. That means security and civilian affairs. Area A was placed under Palestinian authorities, full jurisdiction for both security and civilian affairs as well. And Area B, Israel maintained security control on the periphery because these areas were bubbles with direct contact, more or less, they were contiguous with Jewish communities and Israeli-controlled territory in Area C. So what you have here is, again, a temporary disposition of the territory that has been in effect far longer than anyone ever anticipated. I remind you that the Jordanian occupation of these areas lasted for 19 years. And the Israeli temporary situation of not extending Israeli law or sovereignty to these areas has continued for 55 years. So this temporary situation is also unparalleled in world history. There are no other examples of longstanding occupations or temporary political arrangements of this kind anywhere else. So Israel essentially created this situation, I think really not realizing exactly what the dangers were, and things have taken on a life of their own ever since. This is the very basis, what we're looking at here. This is essentially a map of international law regarding Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, meaning the Oslo Accords, for better or for worse, are international law. There has been nothing that has superseded those agreements between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Therefore, they are law. And that means that anytime anything is done in an area that is under Israeli jurisdiction without Israeli permission is illegal by definition, both under international law and under Israeli law, in the framework of the Oslo Agreements. This has tremendous ramifications, and essentially, one would wonder why it is that we at Regavim are so steadfast in trying to enforce them. And the answer is very, very simple. It's the only law that we have right now. And if it's no good, we would have to change it through legal channels, through accepted democratic legal channels. Otherwise, it has to be enforced, and it has to be enforced universally and equally. If it isn't, you have chaos. And unfortunately, that is what we have. We're going to look at some more maps now. This is what I hope this map is etched in your memory, because the map begins to change again in 2009. Only a few years after Israel ceded the last bits of territory that it had committed to hand over to Palestinian Authority control. In 2009, the man you see here in this picture, Salam Fayad, who was the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority at the time, released a statement and a full-blown report, which any of you who are interested in reading can download from on the internet. And it's called Ending the Occupation, Establishing the State. And it is, well, it's known now as the Fayad Plan. So the Fayad Plan announced that the Oslo framework was over, no longer binding. The Palestinian Authority was abandoning that framework because it would no longer give them what they felt they should be getting. And from that time on, the Palestinian Authority would be unilaterally creating a state in Area C. Areas A and B were already placed under Palestinian Authority control, and all that was left for them in their vision of creating a Palestinian state was to take over Area C. Ever since 2009, that is precisely what the Palestinian Authority has been doing. And the reason that I added this picture next to the cover of the report is because Salam Fayad presented this vision of unilateral Palestinian statehood, rejection of the framework created by Oslo for a negotiated resolution. This is Salam Fayad presenting this vision, this plan, to the representative of the European Union. The European Union, a signatory to the Oslo Accords, should have immediately sanctioned the Palestinian Authority and insisted that this was a violation of not only the terms of the Oslo Accord, but the entire concept of negotiated resolution of conflict upon which the European Union has based its entire existence. Instead, in about 13 months after this picture was taken, the European Union actually officially adopted the Fayad plan and has been supporting the unilateral creation of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank ever since, with massive funding and a tremendously hostile, creating a tremendously hostile atmosphere in which the state of Israel is confronted every day with these violations, which it would have to really confront the entire European community if it were to enforce the law against these violations of the Oslo framework. So I'm putting this on the screen. We're going to take another look, a zoom out look at this, but I wanted to give you a close-up look for a moment, just so that you get an idea of what we at Regavim find when we go out into the territory in Area C, out in Judea and Samaria, and what we see on the ground. The map that you see is one small section of the bigger map of Judea and Samaria. As you can see here, this is the Jerusalem area. I happen to live right over here, just north of Jerusalem. But what are all these red things all over the map? Those are polygons of illegal Arab construction in Area C. Now, this is Area A, B, all of these things here are Arab population centers. But all of this is illegal construction, which we identify, we document, and we prosecute. So I'm going to show you now a series of images, a series of slides, pictures that we've taken about places that you may or may not have read about in the news. Each of these has been the cause of huge international outcry, charges of war crimes against Israel, massive campaigns in Europe, and I'm afraid to say also by allies such as the United States and the Canadian government, that decry Israel's treatment of people living under its jurisdiction. And I'm here to show you why these are just plain lies. There's 100% irrefutable proof, aside from the legal background that we've already seen. What you're going to see is how a lie is created, how it is propagated, and how it is used to achieve the political goals that were set out from the very beginning, and that is to dispossess the Jewish people of the land, to redivide the remaining 22% of the land of Palestine that was originally set aside for a Jewish homeland. This is how it is being done on the ground today. What you're looking at here are tents that were provided by the European Union, and they are located in the Jordan Valley. It looks like a really lovely verdant area, and it looks very, very tranquil and peaceful. When you Google this, look up Khirbet Khumsa. This is a name that was made up by the Palestinian Authority to describe a whole collection of tents in the Jordan Valley. What this area is really called is IDF Firing Zone 903. The Palestinian Authority has targeted areas of open space set aside by the IDF as no construction zones. They move people in, they put them up in tents like this, or they use other tactics, which we'll look at soon, and they create a fictitious village. And if the state of Israel then removes them, you have a massive international campaign against purported Israeli war crimes for dispossessing people from their historic villages. So this is Khirbet Khumsa. Israel knocked down these tents at a certain point. The next day, an entire convoy of European Union humanitarian officers showed up to help them rebuild them. But let's have a look at how long Khirbet Khumsa was really there. This is the IDF firing zone of Khirbet Khumsa. Notice the dates. I'm just going to move all that, sorry. And you see that the area, these are aerial photographs, archival work. This is from before Regavim existed. We went to the state archives, we purchased these photos, and we had a look. And you can go back as far as you like. There was never a village there. There were never people living there. That is why the IDF used this as a training zone. This is how false narrative is created. And this is how it looks on the ground. There's simply nothing there, and there never was. But that hasn't stopped the international community from accusing the state of Israel of incredibly horrible things, right? There's another place that if you Google it, you'll find this is a massive campaign nowadays. It's called Masafar Yatta. And there are whole movements all over the world, save Masafar Yatta. And the state of Israel is being brought up before the International Criminal Court on war crimes charges because of Masafar Yatta. A couple of months ago, the Supreme Court of the State of Israel concluded 20 years of adjudication about Masafar Yatta and came to the conclusion that was clear from the very start. There were never people living in Masafar Yatta. The entire narrative that was created, actually the plaintiffs who went, the Arab plaintiffs who went under representation by leftist organizations and the Palestinian Authority, they went to court to protect the houses that they had built illegally in Masafar Yatta. And they themselves proved to the court that they never had any permanent homes there. They used the area for grazing. They knew very well that it was an IDF firing zone since 1980, but the Palestinian Authority has encouraged them to build here. So if you look at the pictures, you'll see what was there in 1997, nothing. These white formations that you see here are caves, natural caves in which shepherds would take shelter during the winter when they grazed in this area, but there were never any homes here. This is what the area looks like now. You'll see here, if you can see my pointer, that they have essentially created villages. And now you'll read in the newspapers that there are, I don't even know how many they're claiming now, 9, 11, 13, many, many villages in Masafar Yatta. And they have all these interesting ancient names. I'll show you in a moment where they got the names from. But as you can see, as recently as 1997, there was not one single structure on the ground. So these are not historic villages, right? This is what the map by the British Exploration Society in 1935 looked like. As you can see, this is the city of Yatta. Yatta is one of those Area A cities that was placed under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction during in the Oslo framework. But you see all these other things here. And I don't know how clearly you can see them, but they say KH period, and then a name. KH means Khirbet, Khurva. There were ruins of all sorts of ancient, sometimes a cistern, sometimes a wall. But in 1935, the British Exploration Society found absolutely zero population in this entire area. As a matter of fact, under the Ottoman Empire, this land was classified as Mawat. Mawat means dead, from the Hebrew or Arabic word for death, mavet. Because it is not arable land, it is desert and cliffs, and there was nothing there, and there had never been anything there. And that is why the IDF classified this years later as a firing zone, because there was no one living there. There never had been, and it was a perfect place to use for Air Force exercises, live fire exercises, ground troop training, all sorts of other things. What happened? How did these villages take on these names? And if you Google this word, Atawani, you'll see all sorts of anarchists, anti-Israel forces have turned the quote unquote village that was built here by the Palestinian Authority in recent years into a cause célèbre. And it is a massive international humanitarian human rights cause these days, but there was never anything there. So what happened? This is what happened. The Palestinian Authority, as of 2009, said, we will encourage people to move into empty spaces that are under Israeli jurisdiction in order to take control of the land. And the Israelis, because they don't want to have a confrontation with the entire European community, will be afraid to take these quote unquote villages apart. And by squatters' rights, we will be taking over. Have a look at the signs that you will see if you drive through these areas. Look at the countries that are giving their protection to this entire project. They're all in the game. What you see here is, aside from the European Union itself, you see Belgium, you see France, you see Ireland, you see Wales, you see Spain, Great Britain. Everybody's in the game. Everybody is giving money to this quote unquote humanitarian project. What they don't realize in some cases, and we like to give them the benefit of the doubt, is that they are being used. The facade of human rights, of humanitarian aid, is actually changing the map in massive ways. Here's some more. See if you see your country involved here. It's a game we like to play. If we see, whenever we see signs out in the territory, we see if there's anybody new who's jumped on the wagon. We see them all through the territory. And this is an overview of what it has done to the territory right now. So let's take a look at this map a little more closely. This is all of Judea and Samaria. The total area is somewhere around 6 million dunams. Each dunam is about a quarter of an acre. So divide that 6 million into 4, and that's the number of acres. I don't know what measurement Canadians use, but in Israel, it's in the Middle East, dunams is the standard land measure. Areas A and B, as they were originally envisioned, were somewhere around 40% of the entire territory. The remainder, area C, was 60% of the territory. The green dots that you see on this map are the sum total of Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria. Look at them closely. They take up less than 1% of all of Judea and Samaria. When taken as a percentage of area C, they take up less than 2%. So the huge international outcry about Israeli expansionism is somewhat exaggerated, shall we say. In 2009, when the Fayad plan was launched, there were some 30,000 illegal structures in Area C, structures that were built without permits. But in the 10 years that followed, after the Fayad plan was launched, that number doubled. There were nearly 60,000. And between 2019 and today, actually last month, that number has increased even more. We now have documented over 81,000 illegal Palestinian structures in Area C. That means they were built without permits, and it's not necessarily only the quantity of construction that is our problem, it is the quality, because these structures are built in strategic areas. They're built on the back fences to create a stranglehold around existing Jewish communities. They are built along major traffic thoroughfares that make life unlivable for Jewish residents of the territory. They are built in places that create a land bridge between blocks of Area B, those bubbles that were envisioned as separate, non-contiguous Arab population centers within the Jewish populations, within the Jewish jurisdiction. So there's no vacuum. Things on the ground are changing rapidly. I would point out to you that the sum total of illegal Jewish construction in Judea and Samaria, sum total from the beginning of the Oslo Accords till today, amounts to just over 4,000 structures. The vast majority of those 4,000 structures are within the municipal lines of existing Jewish communities. That means that the footprint of the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria has not changed in over a decade, whereas the Palestinians have taken over so much land using these illegal tactics that that original split of 60-40 has now shifted in the other direction. Right now, the division of land between Palestinian control and Israeli control in Judea and Samaria is now 60% under Palestinian control and only 40% left for Jewish control. Illegal takeover of the land. But there's another issue. And here's the issue with which I'm going to try to wrap up because my time is running out. I want to address the main accusations that are leveled against the state of Israel regarding this situation on the ground in Judea and Samaria as a whole, in Area C in particular. Generally, what you'll hear is, and you'll read this over and over and over again, the state of Israel is discriminatory. It's racist because it does not give permits to Palestinians in Area C. So they have to live somewhere, and that's why they build illegally. So we try to address this the same way that we address every other issue that we look at. We wanted facts. We wanted to know how much of this was actually true and what the situation is. Is there a problem? Does the Palestinian Authority, do the people living under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction, are they suffering from a shortage of space in which to build new homes, in which to build new businesses, in which to live a dignified existence? So we did what we always do. We purchased aerial photos of the entire area and we mapped out all the developed and undeveloped areas. Take a look at the map. And you can see all of these things on our website in a much more maneuverable manner, so you can make it bigger and smaller. But what you see here in these yellow areas that are under Palestinian Authority control is that nearly 80% of the territory that is already under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction is empty, available for development, for construction, and is completely abandoned in favor of political construction that takes over land in Area C. The Palestinian Authority is using people. It's also using children and schools and various other tactics to take over land rather than using all of those resources. And again, the Palestinian Authority is the largest recipient of foreign aid in the world. And the Palestinian Authority uses all of those resources to take over land, to redivide once again the land that was given to the Jewish people by the nations of the world, to shift the balance to the point where Israel can no longer defend itself, to use international pressure and international fora to create that hostile environment. And in the meantime, leave the areas already under its jurisdiction woefully undeveloped and the people living under its jurisdiction in a state of complete neglect, frustration, poverty, backwardness, and hatred for the Jewish people through the education system. So the population density in the areas that they're building in Area C is among the lowest in the world. And the areas available for development can solve any Palestinian housing needs for generations to come. But that is not the point of the game. The point of all of this is to take over land that is under Israeli jurisdiction. And that is what we find when we go out into the field. So there's much more to be said. There are hundreds of examples of all of this false narrative that is being pushed and the distortion of international law that is taken as a given. People don't educate themselves as to what international law really does say about Israel's rights in Judea and Samaria. I urge anyone who's interested in knowing more, learning more, seeing more, or educating themselves, or arguing with what I have presented here this evening, to contact me directly. I hope that my email is in the chat somewhere. You can scan these two images here. One of them goes directly to our website, and here is the address for our website. We have a wealth of material there. All of our court cases are in Hebrew, but all of our reports are, and our findings, our studies, our maps are all presented in both English and Hebrew. We're very active on Facebook. We put up updates all the time. We're active on Twitter. We have a WhatsApp direct updates for any time we submit a new petition to court or court decisions, all sorts of updates that come through either WhatsApp, Telegram. All of those things make all of our materials available and accessible. And I hope that you will begin to follow us. The other image that you see here, if anyone is so inclined, takes you straight to our donations page. The pro-Palestinian groups that have spoken very vehemently against my presentations here in Toronto are trying to attack this very platform so that people from Canada cannot donate, but they haven't succeeded yet, thankfully. So if anyone is interested, this leads you to the JGive platform, from which we are able to receive tax-free donations. So I'm happy to now entertain any questions anyone has submitted.
First question: why were the violations of the British in regard to the mandate stealing land, really, from what they were allotted to and giving it to the Hashemites and other Arab groups? How come it's never been challenged?
Can't turn back the clock. I think that's part of the problem. Also, again, I think it's the same syndrome as when the leadership of the Jewish community in Palestine at the time even accepted a further division of the territory under the partition plan, because they had no choice. They were trying to save Jews who were being slaughtered in Europe. And they said, anything that we can do at this point, anything that we can do is better than doing nothing. And they had never envisioned that the British would limit immigration. That was the whole point of creating the Jewish homeland, whether or not the British envisioned this to begin with, or it was simply something that they did in capitulation to their Arab partners in the war against the Turks. I can't answer. I don't know. But the Jewish community was in a situation at the time where it was really take what you're given or get nothing. And I think that they were much more interested in being practical. And they said, we'll take what we can get our hands on right now. Every day that goes by, Jews are dying. And so they accepted it. Once it was done and it was ratified and recognized, it was a done deal. So Israel never, and again, I will stress one of the early maps, the territory that the Jewish community had requested was not as big as what the mandate was allotted for the Jewish homeland. And that was the big problem, because if the British, and I have, I'd like to thank Dr. Jacques Gauthier for pointing this out to me. He had the British not expanded the territory of the mandate, they would not have been able to divide it. Had they given the Jewish community precisely the borders that the Jews had asked for as their homeland, there would not have been enough to divide into two states. So they expanded it, and that made them able, the British expanded the territory, that made them able to chop it up. Can't be undone at this point. But what can be undone is the concerted effort to forget that there was already a two-state solution that has not solved the problem. There were several attempts at additional two-state solutions. None of them have worked. And quite honestly, I don't think any of them will. Certainly not certainly not in the current situation, in the foreseeable situation.
What has been the Israeli Supreme Court's decisions regarding these illegal constructions, and based on what? In other words, what is the government doing about this, especially the Supreme Court?
That's a very, very good question. There are several problems. So I didn't go into this in depth, but when Israel decided in 1967 to hold the situation in abeyance and not extend Israeli law and reclaim this territory, it had to default to previous internationally recognized systems of law, because you have to have some sort of law in order to administer the territory. So what is the law that is in force in Judea and Samaria? If it's not Israeli law, and it's not Jordanian law, because Jordan was never recognized as a sovereign, the law in force in Judea and Samaria that makes all of this chaos possible is Ottoman land law. The Ottoman Empire itself realized as early as 1913 that this was a completely unacceptable, retrograde, ineffective system of law that was encouraging conflict, and tried to revamp the system, but the war broke out and they never finished. But the state of Israel continues to this very day to enforce Ottoman land law on this territory. And because Israeli law was not extended there, all of the people living in the territory, that includes me and my children, all of us are under essentially military rule. This is an absurd situation, unparalleled situation, where citizens of the state...
Naomi, just let me get this clear. Mm-hmm. You're living in Judea and Samaria.
Correct.
Under the rule of the military, not the Israeli government.
Correct. All of my services are essentially given to me through the civil administration. If I want to build a house, which I did, I have to get permission from the civil administration. I have to go through, and the absurdities become so insane that you can't even imagine it. I'll give you a small example, and I know that we don't have time to go into this fully, but Regavim has gone to the Supreme Court demanding that the government of Israel strike down one of the laws that is still in force and is still enforced by the Israeli government and the Israeli courts, that forbids the sale of land to Jews because they are Jews in Judea and Samaria. And this law is still in force. The Israeli government created a workaround situation in order to alleviate some of the clear racism in this law, and allowed corporations incorporated in Judea and Samaria by Jews to purchase land. But Jewish individuals are still prohibited from buying land in Judea and Samaria because Israeli law has never been extended. And this law is a remnant of the Jordanian occupation in the 1950s. The Jordanians, in clear violation of international law and the mandate and everything else upon which they were created, and even the British commitments to uphold the rights of all people in these territories, the Jordanians made it illegal for Jews to own land, to settle, to have citizenship, to set foot essentially in any territory which they held. And that law is still in force today. And it is insane that this continues. So
totally insane.
Yes, so we are demanding that the Israeli government actually face all of these issues. It is extremely problematic. We've created these problems, but I'll leave you with one thought. Israel's decisions created all of these problems, and Israel's decisions can solve all of these problems. And that is what Regavim tries to do. We try to point to the absurdities, document what is actually happening, create policy suggestions that will solve these issues, and empower the government of Israel to take responsibility and to behave like the sovereign government that it is.
Judea and Samaria are the cradle of our civilization.
Correct.
And yet they're called the disputed territories. The last Netanyahu government, he wanted to annex Judea and Samaria. You don't annex what's already yours.
Correct.
What is the status of Judea and Samaria?
So I think part of the problem is things that get lost in translation. The Netanyahu government did not say that they wanted to annex the territory, but there is no English language parallel for what he did say, and that is extend Israeli law to these territories. Because you can't, under international law, you cannot annex something that's yours. And you can't annex something that was not taken from another sovereign. And you can't annex something that you took in a war of self-defense. All of these things fly in the face of international law, and there are no such concepts. So what Netanyahu said was, we will be extending Israeli sovereignty and Israeli law to these territories. That didn't happen, as we know. It's very, very unfortunate, and a very basic conversation.
Again, I may be repeating, but why is it even in question, since Judea and Samaria are part of Israel? Are they part of Israel, or they're not part of Israel?
Well, legally, internationally at this point, because Israel has not extended its law to these territories, they are not considered part of sovereign Israel by the international community. That has to change. That has to change. We believe that has to change. We believe that no other people has the historical connection and the moral and historic rights to this territory. We have every right, both historically, religiously, ethically, morally, legally, historically, every possible right to reincorporate this territory, which was always intended to be and always has been throughout history an integral part of the land of Israel, back into our sovereign existence. And we believe that it should happen soon, immediately, if possible. We're hoping that the incoming government will take steps to start paving the way towards ending some of these anomalies as soon as possible.
Okay, next question. Why are Arab communities called villages and Jewish communities are called settlements?
Why is the word settlement a bad word? I don't think it is.
It's something temporary.
No, it's actually quite the opposite. It's actually quite the opposite. It's we've allowed that word to take on pejorative overtones, and I want to take that word back. I am a proud settler. I believe that the Bible, the Torah, tells us, to go and settle the land. I believe that the British mandate, the mandate for Palestine, said it would encourage close settlement by the Jews of the land. I believe that the United Nations Charter says the same. I believe that our Declaration of Independence says the same. Settlement is a good thing. We are in favor of Jewish settlement throughout the land of Israel. We're not ashamed.
How about the use of the word West Bank?
West Bank is non-existent. West Bank was created by the Jordanians in order to justify their illegal occupation west of the Jordan. We don't agree. Judea and Samaria have always been the names of these territories. That is what they were called, even by the mandatory powers, and the invented label of West Bank that was invented by the Jordanians has absolutely no meaning for us.
Back to this chilling revelation of Arab land stealing, and the purported plan is to create a Palestinian state. Is that correct?
100%.
The Fayad plan.
Correct.
Why does Israel, the Israeli government, allow the European Union to fund, and other countries, to fund this illegal building?
I don't know. I don't know. we're against it. We believe that the vast majority of Jewish Israelis are against it, where we believe that anyone who actually, anywhere in the world who actually educates himself about this will be against it. And I have to end with one thought, and that is people who are in favor of a two-state solution, who are in favor of a negotiated solution of any kind, should be against this Fayad plan and the European support for it even more strongly than we are. Because if one side is taking unilateral action, it is pushing the entire conflict to confrontation. Whereas if you believe that you want a negotiated resolution, you have to have something to negotiate about. And if one side continues to swallow up territory, soon there will be nothing to negotiate about. There will be no agreed upon borders. There will simply be facts that have been created. And the state of Israel will not be able to negotiate from a position that will help protect the rest of the land of Israel from hostile activity by people who have taken over through hostile means. So everyone, this is not a question of right wing, left wing, everyone who is in favor of a negotiated resolution, a peaceful resolution to this conflict, should condemn immediately the European Union's and the European countries' support for this illegal, unilateral action on the ground.
Again, the Israeli government.
The Israeli government has to, yes. So the Israeli government has to find the courage to face its allies as much as it has the courage to face its enemies. And they have not managed to find that courage yet. Part of what we at Regavim do is try to generate public awareness and support to give the government enough of strong support among the voting public so that it will know that it has support to stand up to our quote unquote allies and to stop. In other words,
they're cowards.
Yes. Or they are choosing among a large array of challenges that the state is facing. Israel is facing a nuclearizing Iran. Israel is facing hostile Arab enemies on its borders. It's facing massive terrorism from within. It's facing all sorts of social pressures. It's a small, new country, which is now stepping into a stable economy for the first time in its existence. And I think until now, the state of Israel, the Israeli leadership simply had to say, we have to choose our battles. We need to focus on the things that are immediate as existential threats. To our minds, these issues have been placed on the back burner for too long. To our mind, Israel is now enough of a superpower in many ways to withstand the international pressure. And if it shows conviction and full belief in its own rights, the rest of the world will get in line.
Just recently, Transport Minister Merav Michaeli has said there's no point in investing in Israel, in Judea and Samaria, because they won't be part of Israel.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah. Anybody see the election results? Anybody see where Merav Michaeli is today?
Where? Nowhere.
Because the Israeli public is not buying what she's selling. The Israeli public does not agree. And the entire, that side of the political spectrum that has been trying to push this fantasy that there is a partner for peace and that territorial compromise will save our country, no one's buying it anymore. It's simply a failed model that has been proven with the blood of countless Israelis to be a fantasy.
Terrorist violence has escalated dramatically.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Indeed.
And I just discovered, I don't know if this is news, but again, we don't get all this news on our major media. We get nothing. Mm-hmm. That the Iran's Revolutionary Guards have buddied up with Hamas in terrorism Is that correct?
It's always been correct. Hamas was created as a proxy for Iran. They are on the same page. They always have been. If now and then Israel points out the facts and brings proof, it makes a headline every once in a while and then fades off of the radar once again. We know who we're dealing with, and we know what the connections are between them. And it's not news to anyone who lives in Israel.
But that's how you live. What's it like to live with this? What's it like?
I encourage everybody who's watching to Google the happiness statistics. Which are the happiest countries in the world? We live with tremendous challenges, and we're right up there at the top because it's an idealistic society. We believe, first of all, in the just cause. We believe in the people of Israel. We believe in Jewish history, and we believe in Jewish destiny. And it's what we've got. And it's a great place to live. I encourage all of you to think about it seriously.
Are there any Arab voices, individuals, organizations, underground even, that are hopeful about reconciliation and peace?
Generally speaking, I don't know of any. There are one or two outspoken journalists. They are people who actually are very well protected by close connections with the American government. But other than that, anyone who dares to speak in that direction or do business with Israelis finds themselves quickly separated from their head. So yeah, it's not a popular stance to take, and there are very, very few who are outspoken enough in that direction. Anyone who has specific questions that we don't get to, I'd encourage you to either send them to me by email. If you click on our website, contact us. Anything written in English comes to me since I am the English speaker at Regavim. So any questions that we don't get to, I'm afraid our time is running out, I would be happy to respond to directly.
One last question.
We can also have another opportunity to discuss more issues at another time.
One last question, Naomi.
Sure.
Truthfully, what do you see is the future of Judea and Samaria?
I see the future of Judea and Samaria as, excuse me, as a thriving Jewish community with a protected Arab minority that has protected in terms of its personal, civil, human, religious rights, but not in terms of national rights of any kind. There is no guaranteed concept of national rights. There never has been anywhere in the world. And I do not believe that that would be a solution to the challenges in Judea and Samaria and the Arab-Israel conflict. It will only make them worse. So I do believe that the Israeli public and the incoming government has been empowered to carry out this vision. I do believe that the future of Judea and Samaria is Israeli. It's always been Jewish, and it will be Israeli.
Halavai.
And
Thank you, Naomi.
Work in that direction.
I feel inundated with information that is simply not accessible. I hope to be in touch with you. And for our listeners, please take Naomi's sincere encouragement and get in touch with her. Find out for yourselves what's really going on, because we'll never find out from our media. Thank you, and good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
That's all.